Welcome to Around the Treatment Table with Jason the PT, a podcast dedicated to helping patients achieve positive and sustainable physical therapy outcomes through education and critical thinking. With over 15 years' experience working in sports, orthopedics, and complex pain, Jason has helped many patients reach their goals and live pain-free. Jason is a certified manual physical therapist, certified in dry needling, and the owner of one of Chicago's best private physical therapy practices. Welcome to Around the Treatment Table with Jason the PT.
Hey everybody, I'm Jason the PT. Sorry for such a long break. I've just been super busy in the clinic, just had a lot of things going on treating patients. So I wanted to jump back in today because I had a day off and talk today about running. Is it bad for you? I get a lot of questions from patients about this. A lot of people have this misconception that it's just bad overall. And I'm going to say no. Well, no, I take that back. It depends, just like everything else in the world. It really does depend. First, let's get things out of the way that we just can't change that may make it so running isn't a great exercise. Genetics. Some families just have, tissues that just don't tolerate it. People that have, everybody in the family has a new knee by 50. That kind of says to me that there's a family history, just like anything else. Whether there's a family history of diabetes, heart problems, or cancer, body tissues are really no different. Some families are just more prone to arthritis and more prone to breakdown. So if that's being the case, it isn't necessarily a hard super no, but I mean, it's something to be taking into account because running is, a lot of pounding and a lot of force. So yeah, increasing the amount of stress on a tissue that has potentially a family history of not doing so well could potentially be problematic. And then there's also something we can't really super change. We can work with it a little bit, and that's structure. I'm going to start with the foot. People that have flat feet, they just they hit the ground a little bit harder. The foot, it's an amazing piece of equipment. So it does two entirely different jobs. It has to be kind of a spring to kind of come down and accept weight and then be able to then kind of push and then firm up to become a bony lever. And people with flat feet, unfortunately, don't have phenomenal mechanical advantage. And they're also increasing the amount of ground reaction force that they're dealing with. So ground reaction force, when the foot hits that ground, instead of being that spring, it kind of belly flops, which is a lot harder. All that force kind of comes right back up into the body. And that can lead to problems like shin splints, basically. And what real shin splints are actually breakdown of bone tissue. You actually will start to get some stress fractures from that. That's the beginning of shin splints. So yeah, the foot then, because it stays in that floppy phase and doesn't push off, then yeah, it can lead to decreased mechanical advantage. And what I say to people about the mechanical advantage of the foot when it goes through the push-off phase is that it's like wedging a rock out of the ground. You want to have a nice, good, firm bar to put all of that force that you're generating into the rock to get it up and out of the ground. If you're using a bar that bends, though, the problem is then you're applying force, but that force is now going to bend the bar and not necessarily be transferred to the rock. So the flat foot structure is less conducive to the repetitiveness of running. So that's definitely something to take into account. Legs, different people have different type of knee structure. Females have wider hips, their femurs come down at sharper angles, and it can put stress on tissues like the MCL and the patella. So the larger that Q angle, the angle between the femur and the tibia, the lower leg, can be important. Or people that have bowed legs, that's what we call genu varis. It's where the legs actually bow out, and that actually creates problems. So having those types of leg structures can also be problematic because it'll put an unnatural force on the knee and not, again, is conducive to prolonged pounding. Then there's some modifiable things. People talk about, being overweight. Okay, yep. that's something you can modify. You don't have to necessarily start off with running if the goal is running. You can start with walking, you can start with diet, because effectively force is mass times acceleration. So every time you hit the ground, you're accelerating towards the ground. The more mass you have, obviously, the harder you're going to hit that ground. It doesn't necessarily mean a hard no, but it's definitely something you want to keep in mind, because if you do have any sort of orthopedic issues, that extra mass creates extra force, and that extra force is going to go somewhere and start manifesting as a problem. So weight can be a problem, but it's modifiable. You can fix that. Training schedule. The training schedule that people keep can also create problems. If they're running multiple times a day or multiple days in a row, not giving themselves enough time to recover, then yes, a overtraining schedule can create problems and make running not seem great. But typically you can identify, those patients, that have those issues pretty easily, because they outright tell you, I run 60 miles a week. And you can say, well, maybe we are doing just a little bit too much. And that is, of course, they're not conditioned to it. Another point about training schedule is not starting off too fast. Your body does have to condition. So you can't just pound, and then, not give your body enough time to recover because you haven't conditioned. And that's not just muscles, that's also bones and even cartilage to some degree. There's a little research out there that cartilage might actually be able to, even intervertebral discs might be able to. These are very preliminary studies, but long story short, not overtraining, and then training and increasing your mileage gradually. When I did the Chicago Marathon in 2018, my long runs pretty much went up by a week. Now I did a beginner's program. So I started off, I think, with a long run of maybe, I was already running about 5 miles. So I could run 5 miles already. Then every week up until 14, I was adding a mile on my long runs. So then you get to that distance, it does start to get a little weird because it is increased amounts of pounding. But from 14, it would go 14, 10, give you a cutback recovery, and then so it'd be 14, 10, 16, 10, 18, 10, 20, and then it was, you hit your taper, and then it was 14, 12, 8, and then marathon. So yeah, the training schedule does matter. Now, if you're somebody a little more conditioned, you probably could go and do something that they call a double peak, where you actually hit 20, I think, twice within a few weeks. If you're more advanced and have some great underlying conditioning. Surfaces, I mean, people talk about surfaces all the time. How you run or on what you run can make a difference. Obviously, a lot of people run concrete, and concrete, it has a lot of reflective capabilities. So think of it this way. You have a basketball, and you take that basketball and you drop it, it bounces up off the ground. So all that force from the ball reflects up back, hits the ground, reflects from the ground and pushes it back up. That's why basketball plays on hard surfaces, because it allows the ball to bounce. But if you were to take that basketball and drop it on grass, what will happen is it won't reflect back up. So that is attenuating the forces because the ground is softer and accepts some of that weight. So that's why you see some people prefer trail running versus harder surface running, because those little forces do add up over time. So that brings me to the next thing of footwear. Okay, so the surfaces are one thing, and then what's the footwear? And I have a lot of people that have told me they really enjoy barefoot running. They've been told that they need to wear minimalist shoes, things like that. And I say, okay, fine, minimalist shoes, got it, but what's the surface? So if you're wearing minimalist shoes and running on concrete, that could be problematic. And people say, well, you have to have stronger feet, and it's not natural for your foot to have that much padding. And I say, well, concrete's not natural either. So again, you probably, longevity, either if you're training with a barefoot running idea, you have to go a lot slower, because the cushioning in that shoe is just not there, and that's going to increase the amount of ground reaction force up into the body. So footwear is definitely important, especially when you're running on concrete. So I would say don't barefoot run. I do have a patient that just straight barefoot runs with nothing. And I don't know about you guys, but I mean, if I even just stepped on a pebble, I'd pretty much be done for the day. And I did see some barefoot runners actually during the Chicago Marathon, and I was just kind of blown away because one, I don't know what's on those streets. Two, you have to go over a whole bunch of like grading bridges, and I can't imagine one running even on just dirt, without shoes on, let alone a Chicago street or Chicago bridge. But I digress. The running with barefoot on concrete, you can do it. I don't think it's really meant to be done because it's not very natural, but you have to go super duper slow because that force is a lot bigger than what your body's used to dealing with. If you're running trail or you're walking the plains and you want to wear a minimalist shoe and it's more for foot protection, I'm totally fine with that. We really are meant to be walking around in nature, looking for food, and that's kind of what we're built for. So, on those surfaces, I really don't necessarily have a problem with it. I think, though, at the end of the day, when people start asking me, is running bad for you? And I think if you have good mechanics, I think you have good footwear, I think if you have a proper training schedule, it's perfectly fine. But it does increase risk because running by its nature is very repetitive. So if you have a mechanical dysfunction, let's say of the foot or the knee or the hip or the back, any of those things, it's going to get exploited that many more times. So if somebody, for example, just walks about 5,000 or 6,000 steps a day, and a runner goes out there and not only are they walking their 5,000, 6,000 steps a day, but then they're adding on, let's say, another 10,000 steps on that mechanical process, then those smaller details, the smaller things in those mechanical processes are going to get exploited more, and therefore, yes, it will manifest as a problem typically faster because you're just taking it and repeating that mechanical process or that compensation pattern or any of those things that many more times than the average person. So therefore, I wouldn't say running is necessarily bad if done correctly and you have good mechanics. So I guess the take-home message then for all of this is, if you're going to start a running program, first, I would say start with a good, firm, fast walk program, then maybe move to a walk to jog program. Once that starts getting easier, you add more jog, you take less walks, and then, you start to build up. Getting good footwear out of the gate, I think, is an important thing. And I think either talking to a physical therapist, a podiatrist, or even, the local shoe stores now do really well with fitting people for their foot structure. I personally, shout out to Brooks, love Brooks. I like those for runners, and they have really good deals. So I think Brooks is definitely one of the ways to go. But I would say also getting checked out mechanically by a physical therapist that knows this stuff. Because what will often happen, and this is the common complaint, I just started a running program 6 weeks ago and now my knee is really bugging me. So you need to pay attention for hot spots. You can start off running, and if things going great, fine. But if you start getting those little nagging pains here and there that just aren't muscular but are something different, that's a hot spot. That's something that needs to be checked out because you're compensating through that tissue and it's breaking down faster than it can condition back up. So that's the big take-home message on that. Start slow, track your runs, keep a journal. Journals are always good. But overall, I would say under most circumstances, running is a perfectly acceptable activity and exercise. It's fairly cheap, fairly easy. Goes anywhere with you as long as you bring your shoes. But yeah, taking in consideration of some of the risks, I think running is good for you. So that is my show for today. I promise I will try to be better about getting some of these out because, yeah, it's busy. So busy's good. Anyway, thank you everybody for watching, and I will see you on the next episode of Jason the PT.
Thank you for listening to Around the Treatment Table with Jason the PT. To learn more, visit www.jasonthept.com. Please feel free to submit questions you would like Jason to answer. You can follow Jason on Instagram at jason.the.pt. If you are in the Chicago area and would like to schedule an appointment, visit www.coreptclinics.com. We look forward to hearing from you. Until next time, be well.